All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Ask CASA training. It's so nice to see you all. Thank you for spending some time with us today. We have our presenter with us that is going to cover victim compensation. Her name is Jennifer, and she is from the Massachusetts Office of the Attorney General's Office in the Victim Compensation and Assistance Unit. So she's here to share with us the process and answer any questions that we have. She is going to share a slide presentation with us. And then she did mention to me previously that any questions that pop up for any of you, you can feel free to pop them into the chat or to ask them during the presentation. And she would love to answer them as they come in. And then I'm sure at the end, we will have a little bit of time for questions as well, if you would prefer to wait. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jordan and Gloria and CASA program. I am thrilled to be able to speak with you all today, and hats off to the work that you do. I can't think of a better use of our time than to advocate for the protection of our most vulnerable. So thank you for what you do. I think it's an amazing program. Amazing program. And as Jordan stated, I am the Eligibility and Outreach Coordinator for the Victim Compensation Division with the Attorney General. Just going to share my slide here, if you all can see that. Does that work?
I don't think so, not yet.
So sorry, Jordan, did we unshare it before?
So you should, yeah, you still have access. You'll probably just have to go down at the bottom of you see where it says share screen there. That's okay, take your time.
Sorry, guys. I'll go into our slideshow. It's approximately 8 slides, and I definitely don't need to speak at you. The presentation is about 45 minutes, with about, as I stated, 8 slides, but feel free to interject with any questions. That can also kind of stimulate something in my brain that maybe I didn't include, so please feel free. We are a financial assistance program for victims of violent crimes, and that is for all victims of a crime in Massachusetts. That is both residents and non-residents of the state of Massachusetts. So you don't need to be a resident. The requirement under our Mass and federal laws regulations are that the crime must occur in Massachusetts. And it is a crime, it is a violent crime against the person. It does not cover property and so forth. It's a violent crime against a person where there is harm. And we are both federally and state funded by VOCA. And we have state appropriations and also limitations sometimes, but our main objective when we receive an application is to, how can we make this claim eligible? So we kind of try and find our regulations where we can. We are able to provide up to $25,000 per crime. So that can be, there can be a victim on a Monday of a horrible traumatic event. And then there's another crime on Thursday that would also be, that could be an additional application, and there could be $25,000 per crime available to this victim for crime-related services that could help this child. So are there any questions about the crimes per crime and so forth? I know we're pretty early on.
I have a question.
Oh, sure, please.
So when you say per crime, if there were 2 victims of the same crime, is it 25,000 total?
Great question, Rebecca. No, it's $25,000 per crime per person.
Per person. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thanks. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that, but yes, each person can apply for compensation per crime. We do have sometimes, unfortunately, numerous, the same claimant for numerous crimes. As we know, sometimes victims can be re-victimized quite often. In certain cases, we may be able to provide up to $50,000. And that is in catastrophic cases where it is determined by a medical provider to be a catastrophic injury. This could be damage to the spinal cord, where a victim may require a wheelchair or a ramp for their home. This could apply to a family member of a victim of homicide. And we do in our office, we have a specialist who determines when we receive claims. We have a specialist to kind of go right to the homicides, as we know, because of our expenses and so forth. But we have someone that can help with that fairly quickly. But if there's one kind of takeaway from today, is that we would encourage all victims of violent crimes to apply. And we will try to make it work however it's necessary and however we're able to do it. We do have currently, in full disclosure, we currently have a queue of about 8 months. Once the claim is received, we do review in the order that these claims come in. So we would encourage people to apply, to not wait for disposition, to not wait for, the medical, all the bills to come in and so forth. We are a fund of last resort, so that if people pay out of pocket, meaning if insurance or mass health is applied, but if there's any out-of-pocket expenses, and that can be co-pays or prescriptions and so forth, we can reimburse people that have paid out some money. Or eventually, if there's ongoing treatment, we can work out a process where we contact and pay the provider directly. So I'll start a little bit about our application. We do have applications, and Jordan, I'm not sure if I sent you a fillable application, which I'm happy to share.
You did send that to me.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you so much.
Good.
And I will keep that, Glorian talked about putting this even in our resource library, but we will keep this with us so that if anyone needs it, you can reach out to us and we'll have it easily accessible to anyone.
Super. Thank you. And we have it on our website as well. We also have applications in English, of course, Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, and Vietnamese as well. And they are the exact same. So if people want to refer, or if you are helping someone with this application, they can go hand in hand because every line is the same. But this is the first page of our application. And the top part is the most important. It's the acknowledgement and information release. We must have this signed and dated, and it's very important as far as eligibility is concerned. And I can go into that when I discuss the eligibility that we look at, but date is very important. And the applicant's signature, in your cases, I would imagine would be the guardian or a non-offending parent, I think that would probably cover who you may be working with. Or if you're helping people yourself with this, then obviously you could put your name in there, or prepared by. The first section is victim information, and then the second section is applicant information. So the applicant would be for members of a homicide victim, or like I stated, the guardian or non-offending parent. So are there any questions about this first portion of the application?
Jennifer, we do have a question in the chat, which you may want to revisit this at a different time, but I'll just read it off for you.
Please.
Could you give examples of the spectrum of crimes against victims? And that question came from Bruce.
Sure. We are, thank you, Bruce. Great question. We help you help bring my ADHD brain into focus. But we rely on reporting agencies to determine the crimes that are committed. So we do require victims or guardians to report the crime to an agency, whether that's the police, whether that's the district court, whether that's DSS, whether it's any sort of agency that has reporting capabilities. So we cover claims under Chapter 265, which are violent crimes. So we don't determine the crimes, but we allow the reporting agencies to determine what the crime is. So that would be under violent crimes against the person, Chapter 265. I hope that helps, Bruce.
Sorry to butt in, but could it be a crime against a parent or a crime against the child specifically, or who does the crime apply to?
The crime would apply to whomever is the victim of that crime. So if you're referring to a crime against a parent, then that parent would apply for compensation. If there's a crime against a child, then the child would be the victim in this application and their guardian would be the applicant.
So for me, what comes to mind, if it's a parent, this is a domestic violence situation, possibly.
Yes, or if there's, say there's sexual abuse by one parent, then the non-offending parent would be applying on behalf of this victim.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I think it's important, insurance we are a fund of last resort, as I stated, insurance is applied first. I would also encourage, if you find, in cases like that, if there was a sexual abuse by one parent, I would encourage, sometimes this parent may cover the insurance, may hold all the insurance and so forth. So I would encourage the non-offending parent to discuss with any providers how they want to communicate. You don't want any, I mean, I would hope that the offending parent would no longer be available, but I would encourage people to disclose to their provider how important privacy is from said parent. Does that make sense? Like maybe the best form of communication is through an email only. Don't call the house, I'm not always there, so forth. So I would encourage, that might be something you guys do already, but just something that popped into my head is that if, with two parents, it can get very tricky with criminal charges and so forth. But yes,
can I ask a question about so if something bad happens and it's reported to the police, but it doesn't go anywhere as a crime, it doesn't go through a court system, no one is convicted of the crime, are you still eligible, or does there have to be a crime reported and convicted to be eligible?
You don't need a conviction. No,
okay.
You do need a reporting.
Okay.
And that's why I would suggest that people apply sooner rather than later, even if they don't have any expenses, because as we know, you're working with people that have just suffered a traumatic event. A lot of information is not easily received. There are other things, they're prioritizing their needs at that point, and you may not even know of any expenses, but that can come up later. And if you have a claim kind of in the works, in process of eligibility review, then we can maybe process any sort of expenses down the road if and when, say, a victim is now looking for therapy for their traumatic event. And we can then have, we can help them access that sooner rather than later if we have an application pending. But thank you. Is that Francis maybe that asked that question? No, you don't need a conviction, but you do need a reporting. We do require that these crimes have been reported to an agency. The second page is crime information, and I would suggest to be as informative as possible. And that's why I don't know if anybody, I'm curious to see if anybody's ever worked on an application with a victim or a family, but the crime information helps us do our due diligence. So the acknowledgement and information form in the beginning of the first page, that allows us to do our due diligence. We can access police reports, we can access medical bills if we need to, and so forth. So we would need the crime that was committed, the location of the crime, so we would know where to access the police report. Some claimants do include all their paperwork, which is wonderful and very efficient for us. That's not always possible. So we would then, if we have a location of a crime, we know in Boston, we would go to the Suffolk Homicide Unit or Sexual Assault Unit and access and speak to them. So I won't go into this. It's pretty, I'm sure you all can go through this yourselves. It's pretty explanatory, but if there are any expenses that they know of in section 5, you don't have to check them off. If you don't check them off, if you don't know what your expenses are, that's totally fine. I would just fill out the crime information and send it in. There's a lost income as well. That's on part 6. And that could be, it could be challenge. Say if we have a non-offending parent who loses work for helping their child access treatment, that can be tricky. If we can compensate for that, we will. It depends on the employer, and sometimes that can be a challenging thing, but it's absolutely worth filing a claim. So I'm trying to think in my mind what kind of situations will arise, but I guess to my previous point is just apply with the best information you have available, and things will come up. As we know, things come up 6 months down the road, 2 years down the road. Once a claim is eligible, that claim remains in effect and open until it's exhausted. So that is up until the $25,000 has been utilized.
Can I ask a question very quickly?
Please.
So am I right to believe that foster parents can fill this out and submit it for the children that they are caring for at any given time? Or
If
would
they're
this have to
legal-
be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just gonna say, because sometimes they have children temporarily and they don't necessarily have custody of the children. So is it expected that whoever is actually submitting this through and who has their name on this paper is an approved guardian or someone that has custody of them rather than just placement, I guess?
That's a great question, Jordan, because a good point. That would be a temporary guardian, if you will. But I would assume that there might be a social worker assigned.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
fair to say? So I'm wondering, that's a great question, Jordan. I might have to.
Could
just
we
to
work with the
confirm.
department on a certain situation and have them, reach out to social workers saying this is something might be worthy for this child who needs.
Yeah.
And I only
Yeah.
ask that just because the volunteers that are on this call and that we work with, we have so much interactions with caregivers, whether that's biological parents or pre-adoptive parents or just temporary foster parents. And so a lot of times it's not us as the volunteers really submitting for referrals or submitting paperwork for the children that we're assigned to, but kind of encouraging who they're placed with, or again, the social worker to be seeing those processes through.
Okay, thank you for that. Jordan, I would suggest the social worker as
Okay.
opposed to a foster parent. I think that
Okay.
would be a great place to start. Because we would then contact that person and they would have information as to where this child may now be and who's the
Okay.
legal guardian. So thank you for that clarification. I would suggest probably not to start with foster. I would start with the
Okay,
social
awesome.
worker.
Thank you so much. That's helpful.
Thank
Can
you.
can I just add one thing in there? I certainly don't know the answer to the question, but in thinking about the answer, Jennifer, you just shared, I find that oftentimes the foster parents will have more time and interest in pursuing things like this, and social workers may face challenges like getting alignment with supervisors and DCF lawyers. And so if it's and DCF and the social worker is probably the right answer, but that might be like a 3-month process instead of a weekend, switching from DCF to foster parents.
That's a great point, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Yes,
And
absolutely.
thank you for that. The wheels, yes, the wheels can get slower and slower, I guess. You're right, to your point. I mean, if that person is the legal guardian, then I would say go for it. If a foster parent wants to do it, and I can check in with my director too, just to see, but the applicant is the legal guardian of the child. So if that is a foster parent that's been given this guardian status, then I would suggest apply. Thank you, Tim. That's a really good point, because timing is everything, really. So thank you for that. I would also encourage the foster parent to maybe speak with their liaison and just trying to clarify their process as well. But for our purposes, it would be the guardian of the child, whether it's temporary or otherwise. We have, this is our claim eligibility. So we'd look to, when we receive a claim, we look for a couple of different important things right off the bat. Did the crime occur in Massachusetts? As we discussed earlier, you don't need to be a resident. If you are a victim of a crime but a Mass resident, we can, but the crime occurred, say, in New Hampshire or otherwise, people are still able to call us and we can connect them. Every state does have a victim compensation division. So we would then refer them to the agency that could help them with that situation. But if the crime occurs in Massachusetts, then they may apply. We do require a report to law enforcement. And we do require that report to be within 5 days, is how it's stated. As we know, if the crime hasn't been reported in 5 days, did this particular victim have a good reason for not reporting? So from your perspective, we know children don't divulge things. Children aren't even necessarily aware that a crime was committed for years. So in that case, if a child indicates that they had been victimized of sexual abuse and they're a minor, they have up until the age of, after the age of 18, they may apply. So children are the difference here. If a parent applies, it's got to be within 5 days. With a child, sometimes we have, as I'm sure you see, you have a child who is victimized and a parent never applies. Parents in denial, parent doesn't want to admit what's happening and so forth, never applies on behalf of this child. This child now can apply themselves and has from their 18th birthday to their 21st birthday to apply for eligibility. If a crime is within the statute of limitations, if someone comes forward with, and I keep going back to sexual abuse, but of course physical abuse as well, we can use the date of indictment. We can use that time. So we require a report to law enforcement within 5 days, but we do also require an application for victim compensation within 3 years of the crime. So with that acknowledgement and information form, that's why the date is very important when people apply, because it must come within 3 years of the crime. If it doesn't, and if it's, say, for your purposes, a child case, we can use the date of indictment as the date of crime. So that kind of gives us, we can do 3 years from the date of indictment until you apply. Are there any questions on that? I'm not sure I gave that information as fluidly as I could. Do we need to go over that? So for adults, when you report within 5 days and then apply within 3 years. For children, if no one applies for them on behalf of them, if we can use, instead of 3 years from the date of crime, we can use 3 years from the date of indictment to apply. And of course, children can apply as an adult from 18 to 21. So we just recently had, for example, we had an application that came in where a young girl was raped fairly regularly as a young teen, and disclosed to mom, but mom didn't believe her. She is now she's about to turn 18. Mom does end up applying for victim compensation for her daughter. But if we hold off on this claim, and we haven't reviewed it yet, but if we review it as her at 18, all these funds would go directly to this particular child, as opposed to the mom to be in charge of this $25,000 for crime-related expenses. Are there any questions about that? Okay, we also require cooperation with law enforcement. So again, we require a report and we require cooperation. With children's cases, and in my case, when I review, because of my background, I was an advocate in Middlesex Superior Court for a number of years. And as we know, sometimes criminal cases are not always in the best interest of victims. And I think that that is certainly understandable. And if that's not in their best interest, we can use that cooperation component with, were they cooperative with the police? Were they cooperative to the best of their ability? If they weren't cooperative, is there a good reason why they weren't? So that cooperation piece is gray, and it's gray for a reason, because we can find cooperation somewhere, hopefully. That's ideal. But say for an adult's purposes, we require that victims either cooperate with the police or they cooperate with the district attorney's office or the attorney general's office. This last portion wouldn't involve children, clearly, but no contributory conduct. That would mean, and it's kind of like nails on the chalkboard for me, but contributory conduct in certain, say in homicide cases that we review, if man shoots cousin, and the next day cousin's brother shoots man, like we just want to know if there was anything leading up to any sort of particular crime. So that clearly wouldn't have anything to do with children, because children are unable to contribute to that sort of thing. But that's another adult kind of portion of our eligibility. Are there any questions about the claim eligibility components that I have discussed?
Could you give an example of a justifiable claim?
Sure. If we have like the perfect claim that came in for us would be, sorry. The perfect claim would be that there was a report, an immediate report to police. An application was filled out. We received it within 3 years. That say this child or non-offending parent cooperated with police, cooperated with the district attorney's office, and forwarded all their kind of medical expenses and so forth. So like a perfect claim for us would be something that was all tied up, that it had all the police reports or restraining order affidavits, as well as invoices from providers. And so we'd have that all kind of nice and neat wrapped up in a bow for us. And then we would review the crime. Is it a violent crime against a person? Did they cooperate? Did they report? Yes. Did they cooperate with the DA's office? Yes. And there was no contributory conduct. So yes, a crime against a person under Chapter 265, that would be a nice, neat wrapped up for us to make a claim eligible.
So what would then be a justifiable expense?
Great question, Bruce. Thank you. Any sort of crime-related expenses that can be for medical bills, ambulance bills, hospital bills, any sort of out-of-pocket verifiable expense, crime-related expense. So any crime-related expense. Prescriptions, ambulance bills, ancillary funeral burial expenses. Sometimes there's lost like clothing, that sort of thing. But the most often would be the loss of income and the medical trauma counseling type of expenses. Anything deemed by a medical provider to be a direct result of the crime. So that would be crime-related expenses. Once a claim is made eligible, it does go to our investigator advocates. So it's not, we don't, write a check for 25,000. The expenses must be verified, insurance must be applied, and whether people need to have their receipts, or we do provide a letter that, as we know, the bills can pile up fairly quickly for things like this nature. We provide a letter to all claimants once they've applied that they can provide to any sort of provider. It's a debt collection where it indicates that no bills will be sent to collection because there is a claim pending with our office. So as we know, the bills add up, but we can't prevent that because we aren't an emergency fund. We do take kind of a process we must go through the process that we do, but we can provide a letter for them to give any and all providers so that at least it won't get to that point. Thank you, Bruce. Great questions. So this is our FSAE expense application. It is for victims of sexual assault. It is given when a victim completes a sexual assault exam. So people can fill this out. Usually it's given in the course of a forensic exam. It's shortened version of our previous one. Because as we know, victims of trauma need to have it as simplified as possible. So when a victim has a sexual assault exam, if you have a child who is taken to the hospital by the non-offending parent, they receive one of these exams, that constitutes reporting for our purposes. So you remember that was one of the that's what we look for in eligibility, is a reporting. Whether or not that goes to police, whether that's in the best interest of that child to take it any further, that's not up for us to say, but that constitutes a reporting aspect of our requirement. So that can come directly to us. That covers the exam, it covers any medicines, and covers any sort of tests that are run in the hospital that day. And also, once eligible, that will cover any sort of prescriptions and counseling and so forth. So this is just our shortened version for sexual assault victims. And that typically comes from the hospital, from SANE nurses and so forth. They come and we can expedite that process.
So Jennifer, how about the SANE interview? Would that be taken into account too?
Yes, that absolutely would be reporting. Thank you, Gloria.
Awesome.
Yes. Because we know with those SANE interviews, there's not always prosecution. And I do want to I can't stress that enough, is that we don't wait for that. We don't wait for a disposition, because it does take a while for people to get reimbursed. And I would just encourage, or whoever you come in contact, to encourage people to apply sooner rather than later. As we know, things come up much differently. People aren't interested in counseling, and then a few years later, they are triggered and they want to get counseling. And if you have an open claim, that's ideal. To your point, Bruce, that would be an ideal claim where we have something open and available to people when they need it.
We did have another question come through the chat, Jennifer. This
Thank you,
question
Jordan.
is from Sarah, and she asked, is that separate from the $25,000 compensation? And I'm assuming that is about the last slide in the form that was just up.
So anything after leaving the hospital, that would be the 25,000. So that would cover anything that happens at the hospital and crime-related expenses after that. That would be up to 25,000, yes.
And then we have one more question in the chat.
Yeah, please.
Would there ever be a situation where you can help with housing? For example, a domestic violence victim who is unable to return home?
Yeah, unfortunately, and this actually comes up at our staff meetings quite a bit, we are not an emergency kind of agency. So unfortunately, and that's a really good question. Thank you guys. They're very thoughtful questions. We do not cover relocation costs. So, and that's a big one. And that's something that we've discussed at staff meetings, but as of now, under the statute, we do not cover relocation costs. I can go into the next slide what we do cover, but if you're looking for emergency housing or a shelter and so forth, I would encourage reaching out to MOVA. And they would have, I know when you call their main number, but they can call you back with referrals in whatever area. But unfortunately, we can't help with relocation. No. Thank you for that question. So these are some of the awards that are big awards that we are able to cover, and that would be medical expenses, hospital expenses, and so forth, loss of earnings, loss of support for homicide victims or children of homicide victims, counseling expenses. We do have parent counseling expenses of a minor. So if the parent, the non-offending parent is interested in counseling expenses, they would be included in that 25,000 so that they both could access counseling, but they would share that $25,000 cap. Or $50,000 in the cases where it's been determined either homicide or it's been determined by a medical provider. You know, if there's a loss of sight, loss of hearing and so forth, requiring hearing aids and that sort of thing. Things of that nature could be considered catastrophic. Our funeral and burial expenses are capped at $8,000. And we know that we are currently trying to increase all our caps because they are spent very quickly. Ancillary expenses, that would include headstone of that nature. It does not include flowers. We don't include that sort of thing. Crime scene cleanup, $1,500. We know that doesn't even, we're trying to increase that as well because that doesn't even begin to start covering in cases of a homicide, a crime scene cleanup. But replacement bedding or clothing, there's a $250 cap. Security measures, and that's a $500 cap. So clearly we couldn't install a security system. This could be where a front door was broken down, windows were broken in, changing of locks, that sort of thing. The FSAE, which would be the forensic sexual assault exam and kit expenses, that would be covered under our awards. We don't cover restitution, pain and suffering. It's not for damages against property. It's for violent crimes against the person and any sort of crime-related expenses. So we have to verify each expense. It wouldn't be a check for $25,000. We would need to verify with the providers any out-of-pocket expenses by these victims for crime-related services.
So I have a question. So let's say a child has, been victimized, and the case isn't, it was not prosecuted, but it was left available to the victim when she comes of age that she can, because they didn't want to have her testify, but educationally missed a lot of school, needs a tutor. Does anything like that come into play if they need some educational costs to, get them back on track?
What a thoughtful question. I haven't seen that. Because they're crime-related expenses, we wouldn't be able to pay for education, but I am going to bring this up at our next staff meeting, actually, to see if there's something we can incorporate in our review. But as it stands now, no, nothing.
Okay.
That wouldn't be considered a crime-related expense. I mean,
Thank you.
I can see how it might be determined, but for our purposes and for our statutes,
It's not to
currently,
say it
no.
wouldn't be covered by another entity, say the department, or, through their
Yeah.
IEP services, or but I'm just curious if that would come into play.
I am now too. Thank you for that. I'm just gonna make note of that. That's a great question. And I can check with my colleagues to see if that has ever come up before me, and I'm happy to get back to circle back with you, Gloria. Great question.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions about these awards? So once a claim is verified, we do have a couple of steps where we need to get some signatures by our director and so forth, and then the award or the check would be sent out to the victim or the parent of the victim, which could take about a month or so once they're verified. Are there any questions about the awards? And I want to be mindful of your lunch breaks, so. Claimant's right to appeal. So whether this is for a denied application or it's a denied expense, claimants always have the right for a review, whether that's with our program director or whether it's a judicial review, which would be to the court, their local court where they live. You can request for an administrative review where our director will review the claim, review the findings of the review, and then either make a determination that it stands or that the claim is now eligible. There's a second step, a judicial appeal, that if our director reviews a claim and withholds the immediate decision that it was ineligible, you can go to a judicial appeal, go to a local court, file what's called the 151 petition, which is a de novo judicial review. There is a fee, $150 filing fee for that, but claimants can also ask for that to be waived for any sort of indigency. Sorry. If people are out of state and a claim is if the claim is denied, they can come and go to any of the BMC. So if because we discussed that you don't need to be a resident of Massachusetts, but if a claim or an expense is denied, that particular person can come to any sort of the Boston municipal courts and file. So the order of which to review is important because you can review through the administrative or the judicial in that order, but you cannot go to a judicial appeal, be denied, and then go back to our administrator. So you would need to choose which one you wanted to do first. And that happens. And if it's a judicial review, we do have a lawyer from the Attorney General's office, and we do have a hearing before the judge to kind of state what we're able to do and what we're not able to do. And that can be for a claim. Sometimes people are frustrated when we have meetings and so forth, and they're saying, well, we send people to you, but it's denied. It's always denied. And that's not the case. The claim may be eligible, but the expense may be denied. So there's some distinction there. Are there any questions about the review process? I've been talking at you for 50 minutes, so I apologize. I really appreciate the questions, very thoughtful questions that I will do some research on and get back to you, Jordan and Glorianne, with the follow-up. But there any questions or anything I can review?
Can I just ask, is there any way that we would gain access to this PowerPoint just to be reminded of, you know, some of these processes and things that
Sure.
you guys like to check out before the application goes through?
I can send that
Okay.
to you, Jordan, if you want to
Awesome. Thank
distribute
you.
that. I mean, obviously, I prefer to keep it kind of in-house.
Yeah,
I don't want that to be distributed, you know, beyond
right,
you
right.
know, our groups, but no, I'm comfortable with that, of course.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any other questions for Jennifer or any comments?
So I'll add this to our, you know, the website, the
Mhm.
information to our community resource page, not the slides, you know, just how people can start a process of learning about this. And that'll be
Yes.
on our community, our volunteers resource page on our website under Community Partners Guide, resource guide.
Great. Thank you.
It's very valuable information for us to have. I mean, I know that I personally haven't attended a training like this, and it's kind of something that you forget about, but we have so many children that we work with that, you know, could probably get this. So just our advocates that are on this call, it's just important to keep this kind of stuff in the back of your mind as you're interacting with caregivers and social workers. Even if we're not the ones pushing that form out, we can advocate by reminding people of the process and again, just trying to advocate for it to even be done for the children that we're assigned to. So
think
thank you
about
so
the-
much, Jennifer.
Yeah, I
That
think
would be
about the kids
amazing.
who are
Yeah.
aging out, the kids who are
Yeah.
aging out, you know, and starting life on their own. And they
Mhm.
don't know that this exists and they're just still trying to get over what's
Yeah.
happened to them.
Yeah.
You don't know
And
until
it
you
is-
know.
It is heartbreaking to have people file and, you know, currently coming to terms as adults with what kind of trauma they've been through and not be able to assist. So if there's one takeaway, just apply, get it in. Don't worry about expenses at this point. Obviously, safety is number one priority, but it is huge. It's huge to have that kind of process done for them. And it's huge, to your point, Glorianne, the age. It's just heartbreaking. We have victims of the Catholic abuse pre-scandal that unfortunately have aged out. And by our statutes, we are unable to cover, we certainly refer, but we're unable to cover, you know, certain expenses that we otherwise would have when people don't know about us. So I would, and I know my colleagues would definitely appreciate any sort of advocacy on your part to just let people know that it's there, it's available. And even if you don't need it now, you might need it in the future. So
I do wonder if
apply,
it's listed in the APLA information that the kids get, you know, an APLA to, when they age out, to sign back in. There's a whole packet of information that the department is supposed to go through with them. And I wonder if this is even in there, you know,
Yeah.
they would even review.
yeah, because they have between their 18th and their 21st birthday.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, if you could please include in any manner you see fit, that would be great.
I'll pull up the APLA thing and read through it and see if this is even listed in there as something for them to access. So
I'm sure
Thank you.
you probably don't know this information, but I would be curious. I think Lynn mentioned it in the chat as well, just to know if DCF, like how many reports you guys receive from them, if they're really utilizing this or not. I would just be curious.
We receive a lot of SANE interviews. You know,
Okay.
that's that sort of thing. We do receive a lot of those, fortunately. But again, that's all. And also, if people report, I would just, if we can find a way to make a claim eligible, we will. So even if they think, well, this may not work out or what have you, there may be something that we can do within our regulations and statutes. And if we can, we will.
get that application in and
Yeah, absolutely.
Hope for
Get
the
it in,
best.
don't wait. Yep. And don't wait. Thank you all for the work that you do. I think it's amazing.
Thank you. We really
is great-
appreciate your time.
great
Yeah, thank you
information.
so
Great.
much.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Jennifer.
Thank you.
really good.
Have a great
All
afternoon.
right. Have a good
Thank
one,
you.
everyone. Thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much.
Reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so
Thanks.
much, Jennifer. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.